Journal articles, they are generally regarded as currency of a scholar. Why are journal articles much more appreciated in academic circles?
Well, that is a trend, at least in certain disciplines and among certain scholars. I wouldn't say everyone necessarily agrees that research articles are the most important form of publication. The research monograph books still matter in quite a lot of disciplines of the social sciences. But the reason why a lot of people regard journals highly is that they are usually known for very rigorous quality control. And I can maybe go into more depth here and explain a little what that means. Essentially, there are two different forms of quality control. One is called editorial review, and the other one is called peer review. I can explain this with reference to the Global Labor Journal. We have both in the journal. So let's start with peer review, which is usually seen as the most rigorous form of quality control. What happens is this. Someone submits a research article on research they have done to the journal, usually around 6,000 to 10,000 words. One of the editors of the journal then reads it and sees whether it fits into the journal and checks whether from a formal angle it is an academic paper. What does that mean? We sometimes get papers, say, on human resources in Nigeria. Then we say, sorry, that's more suitable for a management journal. We are specifically interested in labor relations from a labor angle and from a labor movement angle. This is not fitting. We're not saying this is a bad paper, but we're simply saying this is not within our remit. A second question that matters at this stage is it well written? Is it fairly coherent? And also, does it contain references? Is it properly referenced? Is there a bibliography so that it conforms to the formal aspects of academic publishing? If the editor says this is fine, what then happens is the peer review process. So the editor looks into the topic and says, well, this is, say, about strikes in Brazil. The editor then thinks of colleagues in the field who are experts on that issue and who are also unrelated to the author, who are not in the same department or who haven't co-authored pieces with the author of the piece. And then what they do is they reach out to those experts and say, are you prepared to review a paper? And they only share the title of the paper. And then hopefully the expert agrees and says, yes, I'm going to review this. And they are sent a manuscript. And what is really important, the process is a double-blind peer review. The name of the author and any references to the author are removed from the paper. The reviewer then reads very carefully the manuscript and writes a short review. And what they usually do is they look into, is this coherent? Does this make sense? Is there anything missing? Are the data useful? Is it organized well? And share any observations on what they see in this paper, in this review. and make very concrete suggestions most of the time in terms of how this paper can be improved. The important thing is that they don't know who it is, so the idea is they are not biased because, you know, they've heard the name of the author before, they know, you know, this person is a prolific researcher in the field or someone very junior, and through that have preconceptions about what the paper is. We usually make sure that we have 2 of those reviews from 2 different people, and then a second stage kicks in at the side of the editorial board. So a second editor gets both the reviews plus the manuscript, the paper that has been submitted. They read it very carefully, and they then, based on the reviews, make recommendations on what is supposed to happen with the paper. Usually with academic journals in the social sciences, there are 3 or 4 different responses. So very, very rarely, it actually almost never happens, the response is, this can be published as it is. Quite often the response is, it's a very good paper, but, you know, it's necessary to make some minor revisions. So minor revisions would be the second category. The third category is major revisions. It's also very, very common. So that means the author has to do a lot of work in order to turn this into a publishable piece. And then there's also a category that is called reject. And that obviously means we don't think it's good enough. We don't think we can ensure that the quality is high enough for it to be published. We also take care to give reasons why we reject a paper, so that the author knows and that they can decide, you know, what to do with such a paper. This is then shared with the author. They are asked to respond to the reviews and the recommendations of the editor, and usually they then choose to revise their paper and go through a process of revision and resubmit their paper and explain what they have in a separate letter, explain what they have done. Sometimes they also tell us, you said to us, please don't refer at length to, say, power resources, which is a common theoretical framework or conceptual framework used in labor studies. We've covered this in other papers, and maybe the author thinks, yeah, but I have a very, very specific take on this approach, and that's why I need to discuss it. So they respond, thanks for recommending that I leave this out, but I think I have very good reasons. And if they have good reasons, we are also very willing to take that into account and to accept that they, if you will, have overruled our recommendations. But most of the time they try to follow very closely what we say to them, and then they send back the manuscript. What is important also, and that's why we call it double-blind peer review, is that they don't know who the reviewers are. So both the reviewers and the authors don't know who the other side are. Obviously, when the paper is published, the reviewers find out, because obviously the paper has a name attached to it. But that's double-blind peer review, and that's, if you will, the gold standard when it comes to quality control in academic publishing. The other main form of quality control is editorial review. That simply means someone submits a paper to us, and we have some categories where we use it, for example, book reviews. And then one of the editors simply sits down, or several editors, and read it and make recommendations. And it's very clear to both sides who the people involved are. And the assumption is also that this isn't as unbiased, or we don't reduce bias through blind peer review. At the same time, we have the opportunity to work closely with an author and have a very direct form of communication with them. So there are also quite clearly advantages to editorial review, and peer review is a very lengthy and sometimes cumbersome process, and quite a lot of risks attached for both sides. So both sides put in a lot of work, and it may turn out that in the end you don't publish, either because, you know, the author says you recommend those changes but I don't want to make them, or we say, you know, we recommend the changes but we don't think the quality is there. So editorial review is faster.
Let me ask more concretely. Let's say I have a short manuscript, say 20 pages, with some original ideas. What should I do then? What will be the first step?
Yeah, I think the first step is to find out what a suitable format for publication is. The first thing to find out is, you know, what am I aiming for with this? Is this sort of preliminary research, preliminary results? In that case, maybe aiming for something like a working paper is suitable. Or am I convinced, you know, I've worked on this for a long time, I've already discussed it with a lot of colleagues, this is very rigorous, then I can also aim for a journal article. Well, I mean, and then the big question is, and I think that's what you're aiming for, how do I find a suitable outlet? How do I find a suitable journal? And then what you can do, or what a first step always could be, is to think about journals that you find interesting in your own work. You know, you may notice that in your field, quite commonly people publish in a certain journal, and you read those articles and find them useful. Then maybe it's an idea to approach that journal. You then can go to their website, you can check out, you know, what their criteria are, and you then can also do something that is quite useful and that happens quite frequently at the Global Labor Journal. Someone writes to us and says, listen, I have a paper in the pipeline on strikes in Cambodia. Would you be interested? An informal inquiry. Sometimes people are also so confident about what they do that they submit the paper straight away. And then this process starts that I've explained. If you look for a suitable journal, what you can bear in mind is, yes, you can obviously seek out certain journals because they're in your field. As I said, in the Global Labor Journal, we do global labor studies, labor relations around the world. Obviously, it's suitable for that kind of thing. Sometimes it's also interesting, and there are also journals that have a certain perspective rather than a certain research field. So if you are, say, interested in materialist political economy, broadly understood, then a journal like, say, Capital and Class is of interest. They cover all sorts of different fields of political economy, but mostly from that materialist angle. And so that's a second consideration, that maybe you don't want a specialist journal that is covering a specific field, but a journal that shares a certain theoretical angle. And then obviously there are also journals that are often quite highly reputable and, you know, cover an entire discipline, say the American Journal of Sociology. People are often quite keen on getting published in those journals in those journals because they're considered to be very reputable journals, and they are looking on the one hand for a wide audience, on the other hand they see this as a confirmation that their research is high quality.